you know by now that we're all about the journey. June's journey, that is. Like, I feel this game was made for us specifically. It's the closest I've come to feeling like I've been dropped in the middle of a mystery novel set in the 1920s.
That's because you get to play as June, a globe-trotting flapper/amateur sleuth who lives to solve mysteries. You get to visit all sorts of fascinating places, from Paris to Cuba. You beat levels by identifying hidden objects in the scene. And we found that the more we play, the sharper our observational skills become.
The game is delightful and a wonderful way to relax. I'll often pull my phone out and play it when I've got a free moment, like I'm on hold with an archive or I'm waiting for a courthouse to open up in the morning. I'm currently on Chapter 16, meaning I'm searching for the son of June's housekeeper, who's on the run from New Orleans gamblers and the police. It's a wild time.
We know our audience is filled with folks who love a good mystery. Now is your chance to try your hand at being a sleuth yourself. Discover your inner detective when you download June's Journey for free today on iOS and Android. Content warning. This episode includes discussion of the murder of 2 children.
On June 28th, 2023, Judge Francis, or Fran Gull, the judge in the case against Richard Allen, who has been accused of murdering Delphi teenagers Liberty German and Abigail Williams, released a huge trove of 118 documents in response to the murder sheet's filing asking for more public accessibility to the documents in this case. So, ever since then, I think a lot of the people who followed the Delphi case have been reading through these documents and learning more on the case. And as a result, we all have questions. So, in order to answer some of those, we took to our Patreon and asked our patrons if they had any questions for us to go over. We also found some questions in our email, in our inbox, as well as our Facebook group. And we sort of compiled a few of them by topic and wanted to address them in today's episode. I want to just say, I'm going to gush a little bit, but I feel like we have one of the smartest audiences in true crime. I'm always astounded by the caliber of question and people who, are discussing this case with us, and we feel incredibly honored that you listen to us and kind of include us in your consumption of news around this case and perhaps other cases. So I just want to say, very honored to be getting these questions. Thank you for sending them, and thank you for asking them and trusting us to answer them as best we can. When we don't know the answer, we will say so. When we've done some previous reporting on a topic, we will also say so you can have some context. But the people who listen to the show, so often we hear from subject matter experts and then just even civilians who are engaged with these issues, thinking about things in a creative and interesting way and willing to share their thoughts and share their questions with us. So that's what we'll be doing in this episode. Again, it'll be broken down by topic, and we will go from there. My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
We first connected while looking into the Burger Chef murders, an Indiana cold case. Together, we built a spreadsheet documenting hundreds of cases of restaurant-related homicides. That original spreadsheet gave way to our podcast, The Murder Sheet.
Now we maintain that same research-centric, investigative approach as we look into all sorts of homicides, including unsolved cases, historical crimes, and, of course, restaurant murders.
We don't just chat about the headlines. Our podcast is a platform for our journalism. The Murder Sheet focuses on investigative reporting, thoughtful analysis, thorough research, and in-depth interviews.
We're the Murder Sheet.
And this is the Delphi Murders. Questions about the Delphi documents. So I'll basically kind of paraphrase in some cases these questions that we've received. And I'll also sort of throw out the general topic that the kind of following questions surround, if that makes sense, Kevin.
Yes.
So the first thing a lot of people wanted to know more about was the subject of witnesses. Witnesses in the Delphi murders case. And one of the first questions, actually the first question, came from Lydia. Why are all the witness names in the documents? And Kristen also chimed in, wondering if that was a mistake.
Well, we can say that we did not ask for the witnesses' names to be released. And in fact, when we noticed that the witnesses' names were included in these documents, we immediately flagged it with court staff and personnel.
We were a bit surprised by that, to be honest.
But nobody who we flagged it with indicated that they viewed it as a mistake. And of course, in the normal course of events, in most cases, the names of witnesses are in fact made public.
So this would be making Delphi more like other cases in Indiana where, witness names would not be redacted and would be included as a matter of course. There was the matter of some people being underage at the time when this happened, but it's been 5 years, it's been 6 years at this point. So I suppose that there may have been some consideration around that perhaps that's less relevant now. And it seems like this is a new era where, because it's heading towards trial, this is being treated more like any other case in Indiana, as opposed to something where a lot of secrecy must be maintained. But we confess we were a bit surprised by that. We did flag it. We're probably more cautious than some. And just kind of so used to the secrecy that we don't see it like any other case. Now, another question from Christina. Is the muddy, bloody witness named in the search warrant the same name as the person who is being accused in regards to an attempted murder? Basically, there was this rumor on Reddit that the muddy...
There was this whole thing on Reddit,
yeah,
which we actually discussed in an earlier episode, was someone on Reddit put together this elaborate theory that a person who was accused of murder...
Attempted murder.
Person who was accused of attempted murder was able to get charges reduced, if not dropped, because this person was able to make a deal with presumably corrupt legal authorities in Carroll County to falsely claim that they saw something on the date of the murders that they didn't actually see, and that this was the witness who supposedly saw a muddy and bloody man soon after the killings. Now, right after this came out on Reddit, we did a little bit of checking, and we reported without any hesitation at all, without qualification, that story was complete nonsense. And now in these documents, it reveals the name of the actual witness who saw the muddy and bloody man. And in fact, we were proven correct that the person named on Reddit was not the witness. And I'd like to talk about this for a moment. I think for someone to concoct a theory where you're not only smearing the supposed person you're naming as a witness, but you're also smearing people in law enforcement, you're dragging all of these people into this when they have literally nothing to do with it. I think that's shameful. I also think it's worth having some accountability. I think when someone puts out information like that is so incredibly wrong, I think maybe we should all pay a lot less attention to those people in the future.
Because there's no other accountability. These people on Reddit are not putting their names out there, right? I mean, and I have no problem with people who are just on Reddit chatting about the case, maybe doing some speculation, talking about theories. That's all fine, in my opinion. But when you're literally naming someone, putting them on blast for their personal issues when they have nothing to do with this whole situation, it's not like, that this person that they named was somehow looped in and there's a misunderstanding. This was just wrong.
This person had nothing to do with this case, and whatever deal they got from law enforcement had nothing to do with them offering testimony in this case. This was all just fantasy. And so
it's fan fiction. It's Delphi fan fiction. It makes me sick.
I think I just again suggest you remember that when you see future things put out by these people. And also remember that when this was put out, we did come forward and say it's not true. And keep that information in your mind when you're evaluating who is or is not worth your time when you consume coverage of this case.
A lot of things are not worth your time. And listen, reporters make mistakes sometimes, and you have to issue a retraction, a correction. You have to add further context, clarification. And there's a process for doing that. And it means basically going out in public and saying, here's exactly what I got wrong. I apologize. And here's the real information. So people are not perfect. We understand that. We're not trying to pick on anyone for not being perfect, but we are trying to say that in certain corners of Reddit, it's not about not being right or being right. It's just about putting forward a narrative that just fits to people's desires to be the ones exposing a big conspiracy.
And let's just move on, because I think part of the problem is just talking about these people gives them attention, and they don't deserve that.
They love attention.
Let's move on.
Yes. So let's get into forensics. We got a lot of great questions about this. I don't know how useful we'll be here, because Kevin and we were humanities majors. He's a lawyer. I'm a journalist. We're not scientists. So keep that in mind when you're getting our responses here. Kristen asks, I'm wondering if they can use DNA to link swabs from a seatbelt or carpet specifically to the girls, or can they just say it is or isn't blood? Lydia commented she would think so. I would think so too. I would think that they would be at least able to indicate whether it is or isn't blood. That being said, I don't know enough about forensic science and the capabilities to say that for certain. And I would also add to that part of it may have to do with how degraded is the sample that they're testing. Has it been cleaned thoroughly? Is there a lot of sample left for them to look into? If they use that all up at once, does that prevent them from doing it in the future when maybe technology improves? So, and also we don't know what they have in terms of that. So they may have nothing. They may have something huge. I don't know.
And I know we don't like not knowing things. And I know our audience doesn't like not knowing things. So I'll tell you, we're going to make an effort to get in touch with some experts who can give us really informed answers to these questions. So sometimes when we get asked questions, we may not have an answer right away, but we will certainly try to get them for you.
And Kathy also asked something along these lines. I'd be curious if after all these years, there could still be blood evidence on the Carhartt jacket. Having the jacket is huge since he would have been wearing it while murdering these girls. But she also notes could have been washed a few times. Again, all of this is possible. We do know that in the Logan warrant that the FBI analysis felt that the person who killed these girls would have walked away from the scene covered in blood. We also know that aligns with the witness sighting of the muddy and bloody man on the side of the road. So on that's all good for forensic evidence. But on the other side, it's been many years. There's been many opportunities to clean things. And, also, I just don't know. So it's also possible that, if they don't have the right guy, then it's not the right Carhartt jacket, right? There's just so many possibilities that I don't know if we have a lot on this. I want to say one thing about forensics. So far, nothing about this case that as we've reported on it, has indicated to me that this is a that forensics going to be a huge part of this. That may change, but I'm just saying so far, that's not the sense I've gotten. Now, that doesn't mean that won't change, but I think I want to stress that. And I also want to stress that as a true crime audience, and Kevin and I are part of that audience, as well as creators, we've all heard the incredible success stories with forensics. How investigators were able to link somebody to a scene with, DNA, blood, whatnot. And those are all amazing and should not be discounted. But we haven't heard all of the heartbreaking disappointments because those don't get reported on, where there wasn't quite enough sample or the sample was destroyed or, that's not usually publicized so much. So, even though we are all very happy to see so many cases being solved with DNA, let's not assume that every case will be solved through DNA or forensics. this is so far looking like a circumstantial case. That does not mean a weak case. Circumstantial cases get people convicted, but it's just, you know, let's not all get so focused on forensics or DNA that we kind of assume that assume that it's almost like magic where these forensic scientists can do a lot with it. If they don't have a lot to, you know, of stuff to actually look at, then it's not necessarily going to work out in that respect. So now let's get into another popular topic of discussion, especially around the Richard Allen side of things, the delay. Now, to clarify, Allen came forward in 2017 and identified himself as a person who had been on the trails that day. And then seemingly doesn't come back on the radar until 2022. Now, before we answer any of these questions around this, I want to just state, we reported that a civilian employee associated with the FBI misfiled this tip. That's what we got from sources, that this was specifically involving the FBI, but on a macro sense, there's a misfiling that leads to this massive delay. Now, nobody likes that. The FBI wrote back a really intense statement pushing back on this, so we should note that they are completely denying it. When we've previously reported on things that, you know, maybe were less flattering to them, they did not do so. So it seems worth noting that they basically were like, you're dead wrong. We didn't have anything to do with this. And that's fair. So at this time...
But again, our sources...
stand by that.
And they're multiple sources.
Yeah. So we're kind of in a position where we're like, we trust our sources. We also think it's possible people get stuff wrong. So we're standing by it, but we're also open-minded. And if this is proved like this was a misunderstanding on our sources' part, or it wasn't quite as black and white, you know, we will issue a correction. We've tried to sit down with the FBI and kind of get a sense of like, okay, what are you saying happened? Have not gotten that. Probably won't get it. Hopefully we can get some more clarity on this, but I just want to note that what we reported is being contested by them, and that's a space where we kind of are like, would love to learn some more information about this, but we don't have that at this point. Anyways, that's just something to flag going into the delay questions. So Alora wants to know, we still don't know why investigators didn't follow up on Richard Allen sooner, right? Yeah, we don't know why. Basically what we reported was that there was a misfiling. So people have often said, well, why didn't the conservation officer who talked to him follow up? If this is a casual exchange and he's basically then following up with the people he needs to follow up and then it's getting misfiled. I mean, let's not make this a witch hunt when we're like trying to blame this on one person, whether it's a civilian employee of the FBI or the conservation officer or anyone in between. These things happen in big investigations. It's unfortunate and incredibly frustrating, but human error is absolutely a thing when you're trying to process a ton of information and you're getting tips about everyone who's been vaguely sketchy in the surrounding area for the last like 20 years. So again, you know, people who care about this case have the mindset that, well, if that was my suspect, I would have followed up and called and, you know, but not if you think you did the right thing and then no one ever called you back, perhaps you just think that's the end of it, right?
Right.
And actually one could say that about Richard Allen too. I mean, we're not trying to condemn this person before his trial. So if he's innocent and he's coming forward saying, hey, that was me, and no one ever bothers him about it again, maybe he's thinking, well, okay, they didn't need to check me out. I did the right thing. I'm not trying to make excuses for anybody here. It's just a matter of like, I think just stuff happens. It's not good, but if you've ever worked in a organization run by humans, you'll know that like stuff falls through the cracks. We are so delighted to work with our sponsor, Brilliant Earth. This is a company that offers some of the most brilliant and romantic engagement rings and wedding bands out there, all the while ensuring a commitment to ethical sourcing and sustainability.
If you're looking to get married or to become engaged, or even if you're just searching for a special piece of fine jewelry, you have to check out their website. They make browsing so easy.
They even let you design your own perfect engagement ring. Or you can shop by style. I love the delicate willow rings, along with the 3-stone Nadia rings and the classic freesia rings. It's so hard to choose.
And you don't have to worry about the ethical implications of your purchase. Your special gift, your engagement ring, your wedding band should never be tarnished by the idea that the gems or materials came from an abusive system.
See, Brilliant Earth has a commitment to beyond conflict-free diamonds. That means one thing. They only accept diamonds from mining operations in countries that strictly follow international labor, trade, and environmental standards. Fewer than 1% of other diamond suppliers meet Brilliant Earth standards.
You can feel good about your purchase, knowing that you're supporting a brand that actually cares about its ethical impact and is committed to fostering better standards in the jewelry business.
Check out all of their beautiful pieces at brilliantearth.com. That's brilliantearth.com. We've talked a lot about how great HelloFresh is when it comes to meals. They really want you to have it all, free time and delicious food. That's why they take care of all the meal planning and even ship the ingredients right to your door, so you've got everything you need to make a wonderful meal for yourself and your family. But let's chat a moment about a side of HelloFresh we didn't know about ourselves until very recently.
I'll be honest, I don't just eat at meal times. During the day or when I'm relaxing in the evening, I like to munch on snacks or sides. And I assumed that was something HelloFresh could not help me with. So I would still have to trudge out to the grocery store and stand in line to get those sorts of treats. But I was wrong.
Let me tell you about HelloFresh Market. It lets you shop online and take your pick from a curated selection of over 100 items, including all sorts of tasty treats and desserts. And it will all be added to your weekly HelloFresh delivery. It's the best of meal kits and online grocery shopping combined in one weekly box.
This is another great reason to try out HelloFresh. And remember, Murder Sheet listeners get a special discount.
Go to hellofresh.com/msheet50 and use code msheet50 for 50% off plus free shipping. Again, go to hellofresh.com/msheet50 and use code msheet50 for 50% off plus free shipping. Try out America's #1 meal kit today.
And kind of the corollary of all of this is some people, for whatever reasons, want to at least strongly consider that possibly the police did not make mistakes, and that this long delay between the offense and the arrest of Richard Allen was actually intentional, that it was planned, that perhaps the police were in some fashion toying with Richard Allen the way a cat does with a mouse for some purpose.
I think there's an understandable impulse there to basically say, no, they didn't botch this aspect of it. It was all part of the plan. Don't worry about it, and no. I mean, I strongly do not think that is what happened. I don't think that he was being referred to in the 2019 press conference. I just don't, and here's why. Because we were reporting in depth on the Kagan Klein angle in summer of 2022, and that was full steam ahead. Then suddenly, there's an arrest, and it has nothing to do with that on the surface. And I can tell you, that seemed to catch a lot of people off guard. That's just my perception, that's my opinion, and I'm not going to say anything specific so I don't end up getting in trouble with any sources, but
to be clear, when you say it caught a lot of people off guard, are you talking about people behind the scenes or like people on
people behind the scenes? Okay. People behind the scenes who would know. And so, like, this is not a situation where they're like, haha, yes, we've deployed our, ace, this was all part of the plan, No. I think. And now Paul asks the question, so how did he get back on the radar? And that's a great question. I can tell you what we heard. Again, the FBI contested what we've reported on, so I want to state that. But what we heard was that somebody was just basically doing a routine look through old stuff and found it.
And that's something that happens a lot in investigations. People realize, oh, somebody may have missed something, or perhaps there's something in the past that we wrote down that didn't seem relevant now, but now that we have another piece of the puzzle, maybe this thing we overlooked earlier might be important. So it's relatively common at different points for people to be asked to basically review the entire case file.
And so our understanding is that that happened at some point. Whatever was discovered around Richard Allen was basically flagged as like, we need to really look at this right now, as you can imagine. So that basically when it was resurfaced, that prompted speedy and immediate action, which we saw in fall of 2022. I don't think that this was a long game. And I also think that, you know, we have to look at law enforcement as human beings. One mistake doesn't define an investigation, but it can have a huge negative impact in delaying justice. That doesn't mean everyone's corrupt. That doesn't mean everyone's stupid. It's just that sometime, again, if you've worked at a company with a lot of people, you've likely seen breakdowns where like maybe it's one person's fault, or maybe it's just like kind of the way everything was structured, where something ended up not happening that should have happened. And, you know, probably not everyone at your company is stupid or anything. It just, mistakes happen, and then you have to move forward with that. And I think we need to, like, it's like people want to believe the police can't do that because we see all these movies where stuff like the boring, dumb stuff like that doesn't happen. But, you know, those are movies, those are fiction. Real life is a lot messier. And also interesting because, like, the people who want to believe the best about the police then turn on them because they're like, this must be corruption, because otherwise this wouldn't be happening in this way. And it's like, no, it's not. It's just, stuff can be just mistakes. Yeah, so the delay, lots of questions remain. We're hearing basically just human error. Now we have a very specific question about the search warrant of Richard Allen's home.
And it is very specific, and again, I really appreciate our audience for noticing these sorts of details and calling them to our attention.
Yeah, well done, Raymond. Thank you for this question. So he's basically saying Judge Diener, who is the original judge on this case, who of course signed off on the search warrant.
Raymond is pointing out
yes.
that Judge Diener signs this search warrant at 6:37, but Prosecutor McClellan has stated at another place in one of the filings that the investigators arrived to execute the search warrant at 5 p.m. and that they completed their search at 7:09. And the obvious question is, how can you arrive at 5 p.m. with a search warrant that's not signed until 6:37?
And the answer is, we don't know at all. But we didn't even catch this on the first review, so we don't know.
We're going to look into this.
Yeah, basically. I mean, I don't want, like, with something like that that's so out of, like, so something, like, we didn't even consider, we don't even want to speculate that much because we're just not going to add anything of value. But this is an instance where, again, we appreciate our audience kind of bringing stuff to our attention because then we can kind of ask around, maybe clarify. Now we're going to get on to the recordings. Jacqueline asks if his conversation with his wife was recorded, will we be able to hear it?
If we would, I imagine that would happen at the trial. It's also possible that at some point we'd get a transcript of this. It's possible we might get a transcript before the trial, but certainly at the trial, if that's being used as evidence of his guilt, it would be produced and played, I imagine. Some people have also said, isn't there a spousal privilege? But the fact is, since the call was being recorded, you can play the recording even if Kathy Allen doesn't testify about it.
Now, digital evidence. Sarah wants to know, what about any digital evidence? I guess that wouldn't be in these docs. Do you think they've scoured his cell and socials? Yes, Sarah actually does basically that. You did answer your own question. It wouldn't necessarily be in this docs because these documents are not discovery. They're not the evidence that prosecution is sharing with the defense. These are just filings relevant in the case, and they certainly give us a lot of insight on what's going on, but they don't give us, like, evidence. That being said, we imagine that they would be scouring his cell phone socials.
I have no doubt of that.
We saw in the search warrant that they were seizing like multiple Motorola phones and like different chargers. So we're seeing them seize his technology. And, you know,
of course, we all remember that at the time of the arrest, Prosecutor McClelland said, we think there's a possibility that other people may be involved. Whoever you imagine he may have been referring to with that comment, there is a possibility that a connection between Richard Allen and those other people may be on one of those devices, whether it's part of a social network or whether emails or texts or things shared or exchanged. So I imagine they are going through all of those very, very carefully.
Yes. And also the possibility that maybe initially they think someone else is involved and then they say, actually, there's no connection because we didn't find any evidence of that. Or at least we can't prove a connection because there's no evidence of that on his socials, on his cell phones, things like that. But, you know, definitely going to be looking at that. So good question. And then Sarah also wanted to know about subpoenas. She's been looking at the documents. Is it correct they don't have the CVS employment records? That's what they're still trying to subpoena. So, now, Judge Gull did not quash the CVS subpoena. So there's no reason they wouldn't get the CVS subpoena because the judge basically said, you can have the CVS subpoena. That's fine. The only thing she quashed was around mental health. So they can get that. And I mean, CVS is a huge company with locations all across the nation. I can tell you, like a retailer of that size in a situation like this, I don't imagine that they would want to kind of hold back from law enforcement.
But at the same time, I imagine they have corporate policies around employee privacy. So basically, they want to be able to protect themselves. They don't want situations where a random police officer from some town or someone who says he's a police officer from some town contacts them and they immediately hand over everything, including social security numbers, to this person. They want to have something to protect them, like a subpoena. So even if CVS is always made clear they will comply, they might say, send us a subpoena to protect us, and then with this court order, we will then give you whatever you want.
Yeah. So it's about processes, and I didn't see anything in these documents that indicated that, you know, anything was weird with the CVS stuff, but if there's anything in there, it may just indicate, as Kevin said, that it's just going through that process. And I don't believe that we would see in filings anything about like the results of the subpoena or what CVS is actually giving to McClelland, right, Kevin?
Right.
So we're not going to see that here. It's just talking about like, are we allowed to get that from CVS? Alrighty, so now we're getting into a very tangled web of questions around motive and other suspects. Let's buckle in here because there's a lot we don't know, and we're going to have to be very honest about that because we don't know what we don't know.
So Kelly begins by asking, has it been said whether or not this was premeditated? In other words, did the killer know that Abby and Libby would be there in advance, or did this just happen to be a crime of opportunity?
And the answer is, it has not been said. All we can do is speculate based on the information we do have. I want to note, as prosecutor, Nick McClelland doesn't have to prove a motive. That's not the job of a prosecutor to explain why people do horrible things, right? Like, because at a certain level, like, a motive doesn't matter. It's helpful in an investigation to understand a possible motive, because then you could say, well, this person stood to gain, or this person had a grudge against this person. But in this situation, I mean, it's helpful to have as far as telling the jury a story that they will believe. But so it's useful for the storytelling aspect of winning a trial, but it's certainly not necessarily going to come through in a very overt way in the documents of just a court filing, because this is not a time to tell the story of the case. It's just a time to kind of go back and forth with the defense. A couple of things come to mind when I think of motive, and I'll be curious, Kevin, what your thoughts are on this. To me, it's happening in a public place. Anybody could come around. So, you know, that could point to crime of opportunity. Also, like, waiting or, like, trying to get people isolated on a bridge. Perhaps that's an opportunity. That being said, we're hearing from witnesses who saw Bridge Guy that day that he's walking briskly, he's walking with a purpose to the bridge. Also, the timeline is, you know, kind of like things are proceeding briskly. So that makes me wonder, how did Bridge Guy, was he targeting Abby and Libby? Was he targeting them specifically? Was he making a beeline for them on the bridge? Was there some sort of meetup happening? Now, I don't know the answer to any of that. I don't know. But the question does remain with me. People point out that he walked past like a group of 3 girls. And you could argue that, like, well, maybe 3 was too many. He didn't feel he could control 3. He thought he can control 2 on a bridge setting where it's more isolated. And I could buy that. But at the same time, the whole movement thing is just weird to me. I really want to know, when all is said and done, was there something else going on here? What do you think?
I don't know either, but I'll make the obvious point is that this is a very different kind of crime if it's premeditated as opposed to a crime of opportunity. If he knew they would be there in advance and had some specific reason to target those 2 girls in particular, that gives this crime a very different look and feel and texture than if it was just something that happened randomly.
And I want to say, we've never heard about any real specific, you know, personal connection between him and the girls beyond what you would expect from, it's a small town, people live near each other, and people have interactions with one another. So it's we've not heard anything that's like bringing that on the radar in a big way. So, but some of the shape that timeline takes and the actions of Bridge Guy that day would make me really wonder about.
Because if it was premeditated, you would have to then ask yourself, well, how did he know they would be there? And that suggests either he had to have been in communication with them directly, or he had to have been in communication with someone who was in communication with them. In other words, he had to get the information that they would be there. And so there would presumably be some sort of communication connection there. If it was just a random crime, you wouldn't necessarily find that.
And I'm going to just say this, and no one's going to like it. Police and prosecutors have to go where the evidence is. If there was evidence of other parties being involved and that has been destroyed effectively, then we're not going to know those answers. We're just going to be left with more questions. Perhaps we get answers about the specifics of the crime and whatnot, and sort of, generally what happened. But, anyone else with culpability may not be dragged into it, frankly. And that's frustrating, but that's how this works, unfortunately. And I have to imagine that, here's one thing that, is a huge red flag for all of this. If there was concrete evidence against other people as having some form of culpability in what happened, why have there been no other charges? That tells me that there's no other evidence at this time.
At least not evidence strong enough to warrant charges.
No. So, the truth is one of those things, it can be cloudy. You want the truth to come out in a criminal proceeding, but there can be frustrating questions that remain. There can also just be red herrings or coincidences that perhaps maybe it looks like he's walking briskly, but maybe he was just making a beeline because, he just wanted to get there. It doesn't have to mean anything, and it doesn't have to be other people involved. We're open-minded on it either way. But we're also acknowledging that, if there's not enough to do anything, that doesn't mean there weren't people involved otherwise in some capacity. That doesn't mean oh my God, the thing that we get asked about a lot is oh, it's a pedophile ring. We don't know that. There's nothing in here in these documents that indicate that anyone else is getting charged or indicating that prosecutors are saying Richard Allen is part of a pedophile ring. He's not been charged with anything around child sexual abuse materials. He's not been charged with anything around any other crimes that you might expect. So I'm not seeing that. I'm not saying that that's out of the question or absolutely not the case, but I'm just saying that, like, we can't assume that. We just got to take things where the evidence is going. And we can have questions. We can certainly have speculations. And I think one thing that I love about our audience is that they have that ability to kind of speculate and kind of be like, okay, well, what about this? And like, we got so many questions that I was just like, yes, with that. And we can also speculate without necessarily being like, I'm doubling down on this, you know, like we can be open-minded. I just think we all need to be open-minded. We need to be open-minded about Richard Allen's guilt or innocence. He's not been convicted yet. Let's talk about the evidence. Let's talk about the filings. Let's talk about the possibilities. Let's not preemptively say he's an innocent man being railroaded. Let's not preemptively say, you know, throw the book at him, he's guilty. Let's just hear it out, right? And same goes for bigger questions like, was this targeted? Was this premeditated? Why did this happen? Why these girls? Why then? And who else, if anybody?
I want to say our audience is great because not only do they ask us questions about what was in the documents, they also ask us about stuff that was not in the documents. For instance, Chelsea wants to know what the heck was the deal about the Wabash River search.
Yeah, great question. Basically, we wouldn't really expect to find anything about that in these filings because that was all associated with Kagan Klein, of course. And again, he's not, I mean, one thing with Kagan, let's point this out. He has never been charged in anything connected with Abby and Libby's deaths. And we got to imagine that given some of the circumstantial evidence against him, that if there was a real strong case for that it would have happened already, right? So what happened with the Wabash River search? I believe, I mean, he indicated himself that police were trying to corroborate information he gave them. And perhaps that was part of it, you know, and he indicated that they can't corroborate his information. So that would indicate to me that it didn't work. I think, you know, at that time, that lead was pretty, you know, taking an important role in the investigation. Wasn't necessarily the end-all be-all, but it was definitely, you know, let's check this guy out for reasons that are obvious given our reporting. So, you know, I imagine at that time, if that's kind of like, we need to either confirm this or cross it off the list or, you know, go forward with it in some way, putting resources into a search makes sense.
They would be derelict in their duties if someone told them a story that they found plausible and they just thought, well, let's not even bother with this. I think we would all be disappointed and upset, and justifiably so, if that was the case. In a situation like this where the crime has gone unsolved for so long, you want to see people caring enough to continue to pursue every reasonable avenue that they can. And that's what investigators did here. Before we leave the subject of Kagan, let's quickly address a little matter that happened this week where one of his lawyers filed a motion to leave his case. Now, of course, recently, another one of Kagan Klein's lawyers left his case.
Andrew Ackey.
And so people were wondering, was that sort of thing happening again? Is this some sort of delaying tactic? And the short answer is no, it's not. In this case, the lawyer who was asking to formally withdraw his appearance was an attorney who at some point was associated with Andrew Ackey's firm. And he's no longer associated with the firm. And of course, even if he was, Andrew Ackey is himself no longer associated with the case. So he's basically saying, I'm not involved with this case anymore. Don't include me in the list of attorneys who are involved with this case.
So just housekeeping, essentially. Nothing that's a big deal at all. And then before we jump into our last section, I just want two things. One's an opinion. One's more of looking at the documents. Stacy wants to know, what about a motive? We talked a bit about that earlier, but why two young girls? I'm going to say my opinion on this. I believe that the murders of Abby and Libby were unfortunately sexually motivated in some way. Now, that's not stating anything about the commission of this crime. It's just stating what I believe personally would have been behind the decision to do this to these two girls, some sort of sexual motivation. And it's a horrifying thing to contemplate, but that has been my opinion for a while here. And nothing in the documents, nothing that as we've reported on, has changed that opinion. Obviously, if we learn more information that, something's different, then I'm open to changing my mind. But yeah, it's horrible. Because, ultimately, it's like, how could anything, like, motive is almost like, there's no, like, this, nothing makes this make sense, I guess. Sally wants to know, is there anything in these documents that indicates why the prosecutor said that there's more than one person involved? Or there could be other people involved. And it's actually not just McClellan that said that. Superintendent Doug Carter of the ISP also indicated that at the press conference. So you had leaders in this case coming forward and saying, hey, there might be other people. We want to keep looking. The investigation's not over. For the time being, for any other people who have kind of come to the forefront of this case, like Kagan Klein, we will continue to report on his case. And there's a very obvious reason to that I think is pretty obvious to our audience, but worth stating. His crimes were uncovered because of what happened to Libby and Abby. He came up on the radar in February 2017. He came back on the radar in August 2020. He's been that investigation is closely tied to Delphi. Whether or not it ends up being related in any way, this is all happening because of what happened to those two girls. It's part of the story. So we'll continue to report on all elements of the story. Our job is not to tie everything together in a narrative bow. We're not fiction authors. This is a real case that's happening. And we're learning things in real time. But I still think it's worth doing because it's connected. It's connected not in the way that, it's all connected and he was a participant. No, it's just connected because that's how they got him, basically.
I agree. Why don't we move on to our final section, which deals with the topic of both confessions and lawyers. Sharon wants to know if there was anything significant going on in the case at the time that Richard Allen supposedly confessed over the phone to his wife, Kathy, anything that might have prompted him to realize he might not get away with the crime and therefore decided to confess as an act of kindness to help her prepare for what is to come. For what it's worth, if you go back and reread the emergency motion to modify safekeeping, I believe that attorney Brad Rosie wrote they had shortly before this presented Richard Allen with information that they thought was optimistic or good news. So that would seem to suggest that things were looking up for his case, at least at that time, in the minds of the attorneys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And speaking of the attorneys, why don't you read us what...
I want you to answer it, though. So Cherie asks, he has surely confessed to his attorneys as well. Why do they not seek a plea deal? Answer, to milk the taxpayers, perhaps?
First of all, we don't know what he has or has not said to his attorneys.
We know that the attorneys are aware of the confessions, obviously, because they have those recordings as well. They said that in court. And also, Brad Rosie is the one who first brought them up in court.
But anything he said privately to his attorneys is, of course, covered by attorney-client privilege. As to why they don't seek a plea deal, it may be simply the easiest answer is often the truest one. In short, they don't believe he's actually guilty of these crimes. Certainly in their public remarks, when they first took over the case, they indicated they strongly believed he was factually innocent of the crimes. They've also made clear that they believe he's mentally deteriorated since he's been in prison, and that might lead them to come to the conclusion that whatever he said in these recorded conversations may not be the truth. And certainly anyone who has been working in the criminal justice system or has even just read books about true crime, was familiar with the subject, I think all of us are aware of instances of false confessions. So it's quite possible the reason they don't pursue a plea deal is that they don't think that's in the best interest of their client.
And their job is to vigorously defend their client. That's their only job. It's not to consider anything else. To do so would be unethical. Correct?
Correct. And also, I don't think they're just trying to milk the taxpayers. If you go on My Case and look up the name Andy Baldwin or look up the name Brad Rosie, you will see that these are both incredibly busy men with huge caseloads. They don't need to milk the taxpayer for more money. They're doing fine on their own.
And their rate is probably higher when they're not public defenders.
Yes, they get more money almost assuredly when they take on private clients as opposed to a case like Richard Allen's case where they're serving as public defenders. So they could easily make more money elsewhere.
Yeah. And I think, as far as, again, it's their job not to basically push him into a confession or something, or it's their job basically to really defend him as best they can. And if that defense ultimately leads to a plea deal, I think that's going to be after a lot more is done first, I would imagine. And also you have to imagine that if you're being a strategic attorney and you're not really sure about what kind of plea deal you'd even get, it makes sense to keep fighting potentially, right? I mean, keep fighting for innocence, for actual innocence.
Right. And let's keep our minds open. Certainly there's been a lot of information released in recent weeks that seems to really build what at least looks on the surface like a pretty good case for Richard Allen's guilt. But attorneys Baldwin and Rosie have access to a lot more information than we have. And it's possible that they are able to take the information they have and build a case for him not being responsible for this at all, for being factually innocent. So if that's what they believe, they have a moral, ethical, legal responsibility to do anything they can to fight for his interests.
And I definitely understand some of the sentiment behind, I think, Cherie's questions. And we've gotten a lot of sentiment like that over time. Like
from my own mother. My mother, when she heard the news that he had supposedly confessed over the phone to his wife, so I guess doesn't need to be a trial now, does there? But of course there does.
There does.
If the defense attorneys want to take it to trial, there has to be a trial.
And also it's like, this isn't just for guilty people, it's for innocent. Like the state has to be challenged. The state should not just be able to come in, roll you and throw you in jail. We want vigorous defenses. We want good defense attorneys. I don't believe in people unilaterally bashing prosecutors or law enforcement in this case, but I also don't think we should be necessarily looking too askance at the defense attorneys for doing their jobs as well, right? Maybe we can just have a level of grace, but also a level of skepticism for everybody. That's how we try to approach things. We try to give people grace and not assume that people are just corrupt or bad, but we're also being skeptical and not necessarily assuming, it's just, you got to balance it, right? Let's balance it.
As a matter of fact, since we started covering this case so thoroughly, we at different times have been accused. People have said we're in the pocket of the Indiana State Police. No, you're actually in the pocket of the defense attorneys. No, you're actually now saying something nice about the prosecution, so you must be in their pocket.
We're in everybody's pocket and nobody's.
Basically, we're going to tell you how we see things. And sometimes that might mean we come on and say we think the defense has a good point here. Other times it might mean that we come on and say, well, the prosecution is doing really well. They have some solid evidence here. But we're going to tell you the truth as we see it.
Yes. And generally, the truth, speaking about this, is that people on both sides of this matter are professionals and are going to try to do their best. And that doesn't mean anybody's right or wrong or anybody's not going to make a mistake. Or it's just more of like, I think that's what the documents indicate, that things are just proceeding in a very boring, normal way behind the scenes, as we've all been sitting around speculating, right? This is so much more boring than it looks because you're having just the filings and this is an opportunity to look at that and say, it is a court case. Everything's going to come out in the trial that can come out, that there's evidence for, in the case against Richard Allen, at least. Now, I think it's not a matter of good guys be be bad guys necessarily. That's not how we're trying to tell this story or look at this. We're just trying to be balanced, give people our own opinions, whatever that is, and try to be fair. We're not going to both sides everything, because sometimes we're probably going to feel, no, the defense has a point on this, or the prosecution has a point on this, but we're going to try to be fair. And I think that's all you can do at the end of the day in journalism. Be fair and try to be accurate.
Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.
I want to take a moment here to say thanks again to Brilliant Earth. I think in this day and age, it's always difficult to find a company that delivers fine quality products while still maintaining high ethical standards. And that's especially hard to find in the jewelry business. But Brilliant Earth is that company.
Absolutely. They've actually trademarked their Beyond Conflict-Free guarantee. That essentially means that they're going above and beyond to ensure that their diamonds are ethically sourced. They offer a wide range of different natural diamonds as well as lab diamonds. But you can rest assured that these are going to be coming from operators in countries that are maintaining global standards when it comes to labor and environmental practices. So you won't have your special ring, your engagement ring, your wedding band be tainted with this idea that it came from an unethical and problematic situation. It's a real load off of your mind as a consumer, because even try as we might, it's often hard to kind of maintain those best practices in your own life when you're shopping for products. So this is a brand that does the work for you in that.
And you can visit their website. They have a terrific selection of quality merchandise.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that it's not just diamond engagement rings and wedding bands. They have jewelry for men. They have religious jewelry. They have tennis bracelets that are super cute. I love their willow rings because they're kind of like have a naturey vibe. And I mean, I don't consider myself like a hippie or anything, but I vibe with those. I think they were really pretty. I also like their Frisia diamond rings. Those are more of like the classic engagement ring you think of when you think of engagement rings. And so I just think there's something for everybody. I think you can go in there and look at some of their beautiful offerings, but you could actually go and design your own ring to ensure that you're getting the perfect thing that just matches your personality, makes a statement, and, you know, tells people a bit about, you know, what you like, what your tastes are, and how you are as a person. So if you're looking for an engagement ring, if you're looking for a wedding band, if you're just looking for a gift for someone that you care about who loves jewelry, visit brilliantearth.com. They've got a great selection. Check it out. And you really can't go wrong with that.
And again, that's brilliantearth.com.